Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are looking at the intersection of theology, epistemology, and skepticism. Basically, how do we logically test claims of the divine? Because atheists and skeptics often point to, convenient private revelations as evidence that religion is entirely man-made. Today's source material is a video from a Christian apologetics channel that attempts to offer a purely logical four-question test to evaluate these exact claims. We are going to explore this framework and what it suggests about the rationality of God without taking any sides.
Yeah, it's a fascinating deep dive because it really forces you to look at the underlying mechanics of religious claims, just stripping away the mysticism entirely.
Exactly. And before we get going, I need to make something crystal clear to you, the listener. The sources provided today make some highly specific religiously charged claims regarding Islam, Mormonism, and Christianity. As your guides, we are not endorsing the viewpoints of the content, nor are we attacking or defending any faith. We are simply unpacking the logical arguments and historical claims presented in the original source material.
All right, our goal here is just to examine the structural logic, analyzing how the source uses history to build its case.
If you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. So let's jump right in. Let's unpack the foundational assumption here. The source doesn't start with history, right? They start with a philosophical premise about God.
Yes. They start with the premise of how a rational, omniscient God would operate if, that God actively sends messengers to humanity. The source argues that a supremely intelligent creator would logically provide a reliable way for humans to distinguish true prophets from frauds.
Because otherwise it's just, anyone could say anything.
Exactly. The assumption is that God wouldn't leave humanity to just guess, or to rely purely on subjective feelings. Because, human feelings are so easily manipulated.
Right. It's like a stranger walking up to you on the street claiming they have a message from God just for you. You'd want an audit trail.
You'd want receipts. And the source contends that one of the strongest evidences is prior prediction, meaning an earlier prophet predicting a later one. And not just vague, poetic foreshadowing, but specific details.
Which makes sense if God is orchestrating some massive multi-century plan. But that creates a vulnerability, right? Because a con artist could just forge the signature. Someone could show up and say, oh yeah, the guy from 1,000 years ago, he totally predicted me.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem. So to catch those fabricated prophecies, the source lays out this four-question test. Question 1, did a previous prophet predict your coming?
Okay, straightforward.
Right. Question 2, can we check this prophecy via a verifiable record? Question 3, is there another way to confirm it? And question 4, who told you about this prophecy?
Okay, wait, let me try to put this into a modern analogy. It's like a new CEO taking over a massive company and saying, the founder left a secret letter naming me as the successor. And if you ask to see the letter and the CEO says, oh, it was lost, but trust me, I'm the only one who saw it, you'd be incredibly suspicious.
Oh, absolutely. You'd reject it immediately.
But I have to push back here. Does the source believe this test is universally applicable? Even without relying on a specific religious text. Because if they're saying you have to use the Bible to test your prophet, that feels super biased from the start.
Well, the source insists that this is an internal logical check. It supposedly doesn't require prior belief in the Bible or any specific text.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the argument is that if the rules of evidence are sound, they should apply universally to anyone claiming divine authority.
So to see if that holds up, the source test drives this framework on a relatively modern case study, which is Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church in 1830s upstate New York.
Right. And Smith made a very specific claim to answer question 1. He stated that his arrival was explicitly foretold thousands of years earlier by Joseph, the son of Jacob, the famous figure from the Old Testament book of Genesis.
And he gave a specific chapter and verse, right? Genesis 50.33.
He did. Which brings us crashing right into question 2. Can we check this prophecy via a verifiable record?
And here's the kicker. If you open a standard King James Bible, which is what was around in the 1830s, chapter 50 ends at verse 26.
The text just stops.
Yeah.
So the source goes to great lengths to show this isn't just a simple translation error or a missing page. The source points out that this supposed prophecy is completely absent from the Masoretic Text.
Okay, let's pause. What exactly is the Masoretic Text for the listener who might not know?
Oh, sure. So the Masoretic Text is the authoritative Hebrew and Aramaic text of the Jewish Bible, which was meticulously preserved by scholars. If a Hebrew prophecy existed, it would be there. But it isn't. The source also notes it's absent from the Septuagint.
Which is the ancient Greek translation, right?
That's it.
From centuries before Jesus.
Exactly. So now you have two totally different language traditions missing the prophecy. And then they bring in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These are physical fragments from the first century. The prophecy isn't there either. In fact, there is zero evidence in any Jewish, early Christian, or pagan historical records.
Wow, okay. So the historical blockchain is just returning completely empty. So where does this verse actually come from?
Well, it only appears in the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, which was produced by Joseph Smith himself in the 1830s.
I mean, he basically wrote himself into the text, which immediately triggers questions 3 and 4. Like, is there another way to confirm it, and who told you about it?
Right. And Smith's answer to questions 3 and 4 creates a massive problem. He claimed the prophecy was lost or corrupted over time, but that God re-revealed it directly to him.
So when you ask, who told you? The answer is just me.
Exactly. The source calls this a hopeless circular loop. You are using yourself to verify yourself. The source concludes that answering me to question 4 automatically disqualifies the claimant.
Because it's literally indistinguishable from a fraud. Okay, so it's easy to debunk an 1830s claim because we have pretty good records. But the source then takes this exact same framework and applies it to Muhammad in 7th century Arabia, right?
Yes, they link the logical structure of Smith's claim directly to Muhammad. Because Muhammad's claim, which is codified in Surah 61.6 of the Quran, is that Jesus predicted a future messenger named Ahmed, which is a variant of Muhammad.
Okay, so that's question 1 answered. But question 2, checking the record, hits a massive historical vacuum. I mean, the Quran was written over 600 years after Jesus.
Right, it's a huge time gap. So the source argues that we have to look at the earliest documents, written maybe 10 to 40 years after Jesus.
Which would be the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. And none of them mention Ahmed.
None of them. But the source doesn't stop at the Bible. They list a massive chain of early Christian writings. They cite the Didache, the Epistles of Clement, the Epistle of Barnabas, and the Shepherd of Hermas.
They also specifically mention Ignatius of Antioch, right?
Yes. And Ignatius is crucial here because he was a student of the Apostle John.
Which is a direct link.
Exactly. The source argues that if Jesus had made a world-changing prophecy about a successor named Ahmed, John would have taught it, and Ignatius would have written about it. But there is total silence.
And it's not just Christian sources. The source points out the lack of evidence in Jewish texts, like the Talmud, and even pagan Roman records. But wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Could it be argued that records were just easily lost back then? I mean, paper burns, libraries get destroyed.
The source actually anticipates that pushback. Their logic is that these documents were written when memories of Jesus were fresh. If a massive prophecy was made, it would have been highly public. Someone, somewhere, would have recorded it across those diverse secular, Jewish, or Christian sources. It wouldn't just vanish without a single trace.
Okay, so that brings us to the same circular trap as Joseph Smith.
Yep. According to the source, Muhammad's only proof of the prophecy is his own word in the Quran. He is the sole source verifying his own prophethood.
Which steers this whole conversation into a much broader epistemological debate about God and rationality, because the source makes a really aggressive point about the logic of God here.
They do. The source argues that God is maximally wise, omnipotent, and omniscient. And they literally use the phrase that God is not a bumbling idiot.
Right. Setting up a prophecy, letting it vanish entirely from human memory, and then re-revealing it only to the one person who benefits from it.
It makes the true prophet indistinguishable from a fraud.
Which is fascinating because this specific line of reasoning, it perfectly mirrors atheist critiques of religion.
Oh, 100%. Skeptics argue all the time that relying on unverifiable private revelation is inherently flawed.
Yeah, they want empirical evidence.
And the source is essentially agreeing with that skeptical premise, but selectively applying it to disqualify specific figures like Smith and Muhammad.
But wait, what about miracles? Because the source brings up the splitting of the moon in Islam. Can't supernatural acts just bypass the need for a historical paper trail? If a guy splits the moon, I'm not asking for his resume, you know?
You'd think so, but the source unpacks a twofold rebuttal against miracles. First, they point out the historical lack of evidence.
Like nobody else saw it.
Exactly. No non-Muslim sources report the moon splitting. And the Islamic reports only emerge 100 to 250 years later, which the source categorizes as obvious legends.
Okay, but what if the miracle was real? What's the second part of the rebuttal?
The second part is a theological warning. The source actually cites Jesus in Matthew 24.24, where Jesus warns that false prophets will perform great signs and wonders.
Wait, really? The Bible says false prophets can do real miracles.
Yeah. Therefore, according to the source, miracles alone cannot establish truth. If the historical and logical backstory is sketchy and circular, the miracles don't validate it.
Wow, okay, so to summarize the original video's ultimate conclusion here, and again, maintaining total neutrality, this is strictly the source's wrap-up, they assert that without independent confirmation, Muhammad collapses the exact same way Joseph Smith does. And the source argues that Christianity is uniquely true, because, in their view, Jesus didn't engage in this shady circular logic. His arrival was independently verifiable through existing Jewish texts.
That is the core of their argument, yes.
It's a very intense structural way of looking at faith.
It is, and it leaves the listener with a really profound final question to ponder. Does demanding historically verifiable, peer-reviewed prophecy impose strict human logic onto the divine? Are we forcing God into an earthly spreadsheet?
Right, like who are we to dictate the terms?
Exactly. But on the other hand, in a world full of conflicting claims and potential frauds, is demanding a rigorous historical paper trail the only rational defense we actually have against being misled?
It's a heavy question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning.